Okay, well, let's get started. You've seen this place before. I was born out just beyond the first interstate building, and my three kids were born at California Hospital. So I've got at 14th and Hope. So I've got a little background here. I started out my political career, sort of in a policy career, at the old LACTC, which merged with Tom Rubin's SCRTD after both of us left. And while I was there, I introduced the motion, completely unplanned, to create the Proposition A rail system, and all the money for for at least till about 91 or 92 came from that. All the local money came from that motion, which was seconded by Baxter Ward, who required that it apply to rail. I wanted it to simply be rapid transit. But anyway, just to let you know that I've had some experience in LA and know it very well. I'm very much interested, I'll give you some background here. I'm very much interested in cities. I have been to all of the mega cities in the world, except the ones that it's not safe to go to, and 3 in India and 2 in South America, which I hope to get to as soon as I can start traveling again. But anyway, I publish something called DEMOGRAPHIA World Urban Areas, where every year we estimate the population and urban land area of all of the urban areas of more than 500,000 in the world. There are about 1,000 of them. We also published the DEMOGRAPHIA International Housing Affordability Survey, which rates housing affordability based upon the median multiple, which is the median house price divided by the median household income. And we do that for about 300 cities, 90 of which are major metropolitan cities. This is in 8 nations. And I'm sorry to say, virtually every major market in California is severely unaffordable. I have no doubt that there's a glut of housing at the luxury level, because that's the only kind of housing anybody can make money at this point. But anyway, going on, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to try to go through fairly quickly. These will be my general subjects, and I have this up here just so I'll remember what I'm doing. But I'm going to talk about these items, and we'll move right to it after a little more. Okay. Let's first talk about COVID. Now, there's been a lot of concern about the relationship between between density and COVID. Now, there are a lot of people out there that basically say, oh, there's no correlation between density and COVID. Well, that's right from a theoretical standpoint in the abstract. However, if you think about a disease that is transferred between people personally who are close together, and that the risk of such transmission is greater where there are enclosed spaces that are insufficiently ventilated, like elevators, like crowded office buildings, like overcrowded housing, and like transit, there sure is a relationship between density and COVID. It's not that the density is the problem, it's that the way we live in that density is the problem. So that you see here on this chart, we basically show we can actually get urban area densities for all of the counties in the country. And you see that up to a density of 25,000 to 50,000, the death rate is 4 times the population part of that they have. Now that's because those counties are like the Bronx, Kings County, and Queens in New York. These are places where there's plenty of overcrowded housing. There's one county, notice the one at 50 and over, 50,000 and over, that's Manhattan, that's New York County. Not as bad there, because an awful lot of people who live on the Upper East Side, for example, walk to work. They don't get in crowded offices very often. They don't get into crowded transit often. So the fact is the demographics are just a lot better in Manhattan. But the point is, you see that if we deal with population densities of 5,000 or less, we're largely dealing with average or below average death rates. And to give you an idea of 5,000, most of LA's suburbs are more in the range of 6,000 to 7,000, but around the country, 5,000 would be more dense than suburbs. What a lot of people don't realize about the LA area is that you are, and I was born in, the densest urban area in the country. And the reason for that is quite simply that you can go to the edge of town and find that you're building very densely, whereas if you go to New York, where the density is very high in the core, it's not at all high in the suburbs. Here's a chart that basically shows you the relationship. So let's see here. So I just wanted to cover that. Now, what this has done, and by the way, the density connection has been noted also in Japan. It's been noted in France, and it's been noted in the United Kingdom. And one of the real problems is that its comparable data is almost impossible to get. And I'm trying routinely to try to discourage people from comparing international data, because I heard somebody trying to compare the Wuhan rate, the Wuhan city rate, to the rate of the United States, obviously not understanding Chinese cities at all, and the fact that they are usually about 80% rural, not urban. But anyway, we see here that what has happened in the last 30 years is that working at home in the Los Angeles area, the Los Angeles urban area, has actually gone up. And that's not the urban area, that's the combined statistical area, which includes the Orange, LA, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Ventura counties. Nationally, working at home exceeded transit in 2017. And the amazing thing about it is that we've spent in Los Angeles, partially due to me, frankly, something on the order of probably $25 billion. Yet we've spent nothing, virtually nothing, on working at home, and we've had an increase in working at home, and it's now past transit. So the fact is that in the future, with all the concern about density and cities and disease and the potential of further infection in the future, further pandemic, there's plenty of belief that things are going to change substantially. For example, in 2018 in the United States, the average employee went to work, that is worked from home 5% of the time, essentially. Stanford research says that during the epidemic, it hit 42%. And the results have been stunning. I mean, you can see it just by what's going on with the empty streets of New York, the empty streets of downtown San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that in New York, for example, the suburban rail systems, the 3 suburban rail systems, are down 80% overall. In the Peninsula, down from San Francisco, down 95% in September from a year ago. Chicago's metro system down 95%, BART down 90% approximately, and DC Metro, not DC Metro, the DC Maryland Department of Transportation suburban rail service is down too. And the sense is that cities are probably going to be an awful lot different in how people move around after COVID. Hong Kong banks, and by the way, I would argue and will argue in a major part of this presentation, that there is no place in the world where working at home makes less sense and where transit makes more sense than Hong Kong. Yet the 2 largest banks in Hong Kong are basically saying they anticipate in the future having to have only half the workspace because of working at home, and they expect their employees to work from home 2 to 3 days a week. So there are big changes coming. I know that's very threatening to people, but one of my great concerns is I don't think the planners have any idea this is going on, and they're trying to pretend, at least it's my impression, that the world hasn't changed. It has changed radically. People want space. They want offices at home. They don't want to be in harm's way. And at the same time, places like Manhattan and San Francisco have become a whole lot less attractive to the people that like to live there. And by the way, I would like to live there, just because so much has been forced out of business and there's so much that has changed. And I'm not going to get into transit much. I don't have much time here, but I do want to make just one comment on transit that has to do with this discussion of the future with respect to cities. And that is, we need to understand that the transit really isn't an answer. The reason I say that is, and you can look here at the University of Minnesota data that basically suggests that even in San Francisco, which has the best transit system in the world by this University of Minnesota measure, only 3.8% of the jobs can be reached by the average employee by transit. By comparison, 30% by car. And around the country, you see this, and everywhere we look at this data, there are plenty of reasons for it, and we can discuss why it's the case. But if you're poor, and you're needing to locate in housing that's subsidized, and you need a job, you can't afford to go taking an hour or two to get to work. And this is 30-minute access. Okay, going on. Big changes ahead, and this is the stuff we'll be writing on in the next couple of days. The Hong Kong Shanghai Bank and the Standard and Chartered banks have basically suggested that there are going to be great changes in how they work in Hong Kong. This is Hong Kong, you see, and this gets us to sort of talking about densification. I need to turn this off. I can't. Hope this works. Okay, good. Essentially, what we have in Hong Kong, you have and Hong Kong is really the example. It is the model for densification and transit. It is the ultimate urban area with respect to urban policy as we know it today. The GDP per capita of Hong Kong is 62,400. The GDP of the US is only slightly above it. Yet Hong Kong is completely transit dependent. The average household has, I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. 0.08, not 0.8, compared to 1.88 cars per household in Hong Kong. Now, when we look at density, what we find is Hong Kong has by far the highest density in the high income world. It's not even close. Singapore is second, you see it less than half, and both of these high density places, the two highest density urban areas in the high income world, both of these are islands. They don't have hinterlands to lower the density. Seoul, on the other hand, has 20,000 people per square mile. You can see LA Riverside, that's the urban area, the urban density at about 6,000. The Bay Area a little bit less, New York less, Portland, believe it or not, even less. And Atlanta is about as low as it comes, 1,049th out of 155. So this is why we're talking about Hong Kong, because it has such a high density. We see it here compared in detail to the California urban areas and also to Atlanta, because Atlanta really is the lowest density large urban area in the world. In Hong Kong,
Wendell, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You're going so fast. What did that last slide mean?
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, what we're basically showing you is the density of urban areas here, and comparing the three largest urban areas in California, plus Atlanta, because Atlanta is so low.
And is that persons per square mile, or what is that?
Yeah, that's persons per square mile, right? Sorry about that.
Okay, so you're saying that Los Angeles Riverside, which is essentially a massive area of Southern California filled with big cities and suburbs, has a higher density than the San Francisco, San Jose area.
Yeah, now, by the way, this is the continuous urban area, and this has been the case for 3 decades. LA, no question, the LA urban area, which we define here using the UN style definition, would extend essentially from Chatsworth to essentially Moreno Valley and Beaumont and south to Lake Forest, or I should say actually San Clemente. And yes, it is denser than San Francisco, San Jose, denser than San Diego, and by the way, denser than New York, which is only 4,400.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's been known for a long time. A lot of planners don't like it. They find it inconvenient. They find all sorts of ways to try to discount it. The truth is the truth. Now, transit work trip market share in Hong Kong, 70%. So that's the highest in the world. And you can see, by the way, San Francisco does very well. It's done well. This is the metropolitan area here. But New York is the highest at about 32%. The third behind San Francisco, I think, is probably Chicago at about 12 or 13%. Notice, however, this average one-way work trip travel time. Los Angeles has the best travel time in the world of any mega city we can find. There are a few we don't know about, but I'm pretty confident they aren't any better. The point is, of all the available data, LA has the best work trip market share of any urban area of more than 10 million. San Francisco is the same, though it's not as big. You can see Atlanta does very poorly, but look at Hong Kong. For a 65,000 density city, highly centralized, wouldn't you expect that having such a wonderful transit system, and they do have a great transit system, that the work trip travel time in Hong Kong should be less than Los Angeles? But it's about 50% more, something like that. So anyway, going on now to average house size. You can see in the United States, and this is new houses, and it is an average of new built houses and apartments. You can see that the United States is the highest among these countries we have data for. Australia second. Look at Hong Kong. How would you like to have your household living in 482 square feet? And by the way, the average Hong Kong household is about the same in size as the average American household. Now, with all that, what do you think we've got in terms of housing affordability? You know, density. I mean, you've heard it from the Wiener types all along, and I don't mean to put it that way in any sort of a way that's not respectful. The supporters of the Wiener bills. You would think that having the higher density would lower prices and cause the housing to be less expensive. No, as a matter of fact, for that 480 square foot house, you are paying 20.8 times your income on average in Hong Kong compared to 9 in Los Angeles, which is terrible, by the way, and is more than three times what it was before we started having tough regulation in California. And you can see Atlanta, which is about where it should be. So let's talk about housing affordability for a little bit here. You have a real housing affordability crisis in California, and it is much bigger than affordable housing. What we have here, what you see here is up to 1970, there was little difference in the price to income ratio between California and the rest of the country. These are the major metropolitan areas. Now, all of your major metropolitan areas, that would be 5, we're not counting Fresno yet, though it'll be over 1 million soon. All of your major metropolitan areas are severely unaffordable with a median multiple of more than 5. They all used to be under 3 in 1970. So in any event, you can see there are other cities around the country that are there that are high as well. But much of the country is still pretty good, not great, but still pretty good. The Council of Economic Advisors put out a report, I think early this year, that basically suggested, based upon work by Glaser and Giorco, the extent to which regulation is raising the cost of housing. You can see San Francisco at close to 200%, Los Angeles at 100%. They didn't put in San Jose. I suspect they've got San Jose buried in the San Francisco data. And here's the real problem that Glaser and Giorco, and Glaser's at Harvard and Giorco's at University of Pennsylvania. Here's the real problem. You see that light blue in the middle? That's the land-related costs. And you can see the difference in the green between the rest of the country and the San Francisco metropolitan area. That's the construction cost. Believe it or not, it doesn't cost that much more to build a house in San Francisco metropolitan area than it does in the rest of the country. However, the land cost, which is what this regulation does in terms of raising costs, it's the land costs that are bigger. Glaser and Giorco say that the land costs are about 10 times what was expected. Now, all that being said, you're being led to believe that if only we got rid of single family zoning, things would be more affordable. Now, we all know from the good work that Rodriguez posts, and I probably did not say that name right, as well as Storper, that London School of Economics research, they point out, of course, that somehow all this theory doesn't work and all we get is luxury housing out of upzoning, and they're absolutely right. And if you look at the 53 major metropolitan areas in the United States and say, okay, well, let's see, what is the percentage of detached single family houses in the metropolitan area as a percentage of the whole? And are they more affordable where there's less single family housing? Well, no, not at all. You can see it right there, that the more houses you have that are single family, the lower the cost. The problem is that the areas that are more expensive have regulations that are just over the top, as it were. One of the problems you've got in California is the failure of policymakers to recognize the economics of land, and even urban planners. This is from an urban planning publication. That is, this is copied, derived from an urban planning publication. What you have with, for example, urban containment policy, which may be urban growth boundaries like Portland, or like you have in Contra Costa and Alameda County, or it can be other things that make it almost impossible to build on the urban periphery and destroy the competitive market for land, you end up raising the price of land inside the area of containment. And that's the real problem. Unless you do that, there's not an answer. You're not going to improve housing affordability by upzoning. Frankly, you're not going to improve it by much else but reform on the urban periphery. And I'm not, and that's real difficult because nobody wants their house prices to go down. But I think there are ways to get around it. And you can see here how bad it's gotten. The red is the minimum qualifying income for a median price house. This was in 2017. And the green is the top income quartile. In other words, at that top of that green bar is the level at which you are in the top 20% of income. Now, there are a lot of places in this country, like just about everywhere, that doesn't have urban containment regulation, where median household income people can afford the median household, the median house. They can't in California. This is what we're talking about. Yeah, there's an oversupply of luxury housing, but that doesn't do middle income people, which is any good, which is one of the reasons so many people are leaving.
Wendell, could you please go back to that and explain the red and the green?
Yeah, the green is the point at which the top 20% begins. In other words, in San Jose, it's somewhere around $205,000. Above that level is the top quintile, the top 20% of the income distribution for households. Next to it is the minimum qualifying income using National Association of Realtors data. That's the income you need to afford the median priced house in the San Jose metropolitan area. And you can see that in San Francisco, it's not quite there. In LA, it's not quite there. And LA includes Orange, San Francisco, but still what we've got is a situation where we have made housing unaffordable, not just to low income people. We have made housing unaffordable to the average person, to the average household. And those of you who bought earlier are very lucky because you wouldn't be able to probably afford your house today. That's a good chance of that anyway. Let's talk now about population and migration. This is, let me see if I can get this off. Okay, what I've done here is shown the two large commuting zones in California. The reason I do it is to show you what we mean by a combined statistical area. The yellow counties you can see there are essentially the commuting zone of the San Francisco Bay Area in 2000. Notice it was, I think, 9 counties, okay? Now, since that time, as a result of the housing costs, people are moving all over the place. It is so bad that Merced County is now considered to be in the San Francisco commuting zone. Merced County, that borders on Fresno County. San Benito has been added and so on. So the basic point is that what we have created, and much of the regulation in California is intended to try to stop sprawl. Well, what you do is you end up forcing people either to move outside further and commute further or to move out of the state. Now this raises another point too, and that is a lot of people say, well, what are those people down there in Merced County? How are they getting to work? It's a long way to downtown San Francisco. Well, it's time we begin to recognize that our cities are no longer monocentric. Downtown San Francisco has only 8% of the jobs that are in that current San Francisco CSA. In Los Angeles down below, and you see that huge area out there, which extends where the urban area stops at Beaumont and Palm Springs, but goes on to Las Vegas and Blythe, across deserts just because our counties are so big. But in Los Angeles, only 2% of the jobs are in the central business district. And in fact, our cities have changed so much. And by the way, this is happening all over the world. Our cities have changed so much that Gordon and Lee at USC, looking at 2000 data, found that 68% of the jobs in all of the major metropolitan areas at that point, over 1 million, 68% of the jobs or more were not downtown and were not in suburban office centers. So the monocentric city is a city of the past, and even the polycentric city is a city of the past. This just shows you The map is terrible. It's a Google map, but the outline in blue here is essentially the urban area, and you can see that as a part of the CSA. So because of the large counties, it's just very large. Now, with respect to domestic migration, if you look at, and domestic migration is people moving from one county in the country to another. That's where the Census Bureau looks at it. We don't know anything about who moves from the city of Los Angeles to anywhere else, but we do know who moves from Los Angeles County to some other county. Now, at that level, what we find is that among the severely unaffordable metropolitan areas, and those are places like in California, and Portland, and Denver, and Seattle, there are a few others like that. The loss since 2010 has been 2 million people, 2 million domestic migrants. Seriously unaffordable, that's with a median multiple of 4 to 5, have been up over 1 million and so on. So domestic migration is being driven by housing affordability, and this is a real problem for California. It is, I think, a real crisis for you. And this is sort of my last slide. Essentially, what you've got is a situation where, and you've seen how so many companies are leaving the state. CBRE just announced they're leaving downtown Los Angeles. They're moving, I believe, to Richardson, Texas. Everybody's moving to North Dallas. The ones that aren't moving to North Dallas are moving to Austin or Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. McKesson left San Francisco. Jacobs Engineering left Pasadena. Toyota left Torrance, and a whole range of other things. And California is in a very difficult situation because as I talk to people, especially in Orange County, the big concern of business people is how can we get employees when we can't get anybody that can afford to live in this place? That's a real problem. And some people say, well, we've got to get better jobs. You're not going to get better jobs. Forget that. This is a competitive economy, and nobody is going to locate, unless there is a very good reason for it, in an expensive area like Los Angeles, when they can locate in Nevada or Arizona or even Ohio or Indiana. And by the way, Columbus, Ohio is doing as well in domestic migration as Portland or Seattle at this point. The point is that this is a real problem. And of course, the housing affordability, which really drives the cost of living. 85% of the difference in the cost of living between the more expensive metropolitan areas and the average is in housing costs. So this is a big deal. We recommended in a recent report through Chapman the designation of a housing opportunity area, which would essentially go from the crest of the Coast Mountains to the crest of the Sierras, and it would include the Antelope Valley. It's not shown on this map because I couldn't break up LA County, but it would include the part of LA County north of the San Gabriel Mountains. It includes San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial counties, where you would basically say, okay, we're gonna roll back the regulations. We're gonna roll back anything in CEQA that's in the way. We're going to roll back SB 375. That created just a dreadful situation with respect to peripheral development, so we can start to develop housing on low-cost land. Now, one might be concerned that that would cause prices to be reduced in places like the San Gabriel or the San Joaquin Valley and so on, and it probably would. But at least across the San Joaquin Valley and the Sacramento Valley and San Bernardino Riverside, the median multiple is only about 5. It's not 8 or 9. We're not talking about something that's going to be a huge hit to the economy. But my sense is, and this is not a solution that I think anybody's going to be jumping on real quickly, but you know, if we could get housing affordability under control in the interior, give it up on the coast. It's never coming back. It's never come back anywhere where you have allowed planners to do what has been done in California. Nowhere. Not the United Kingdom, not Australia, not New Zealand, nowhere. So let's recognize, however, there is some hope for the interior. And, you know, if we could get the costs of housing under control in the interior, maybe the next CBRE or McKesson that decides to leave San Francisco will say, well, you know what? Fresno's better than Dallas-Fort Worth. Now, I don't happen to think that's true, but I'll bet that most people in California would. And so the point is that California needs to become competitive, and it will never become competitive until it deals with the housing problem, which is a real problem. And I'll drop it at that. I had a little extra section that I called the postscript on transit, but that was only if I ran out of things to say. I apologize for going so fast here. Anyway, go ahead. Any questions is fine.
Wendell, I'd like to start off the questions. Can you talk a little bit before we get into this, the complexities of your presentation, a little bit about California's flat population growth, the fact that the census showed it before all of the panic in Sacramento, and now the census is continuing to show flat growth in California?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, that's one of the slides I killed at the end. Okay, yeah, indeed. First of all, recognize that, my history on talking about California growth goes back to 2006, when the Department of Finance put out a projection that had California at 60 million people by 2050. There was no way that was going to happen based upon what was going on at that point. And I had an article in the Orange County Register, and I've had a lot of fun through the years taking credit for the fact that I was sort of the first person to notice how far off they were. The projections have been way cut back. Here's what's gone on. I mean, in the good old days, you all know how California used to grow up until about 2000. It even grew in the 2010s, or in the early 2000s. Between 2000 and 2015, California grew 300,000 per year. That's very low for California. You know what it was in 2019? 51,000. 51,000. California may have grown 51,000 in 1851, the first year of statehood. I mean, this is unbelievable. So California's growth has stopped. It's domestic migration, and I guess I must have killed that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I killed that slide. Its domestic migration has gone through the floor. Now, by the way, you have seen 2.5 million people leave California. That's net. 2.5 million people leave California since 2000. It improved for a while during the early 2000s, when especially the San Francisco metropolitan area did better. The San Jose metropolitan area never did very well at all. LA was always a problem. But what has happened now is, after losing like 50,000 people a year to domestic migration, the state lost 200,000 in 2019, and who knows what's going to happen in 2020. Everything's changed. But anyway, that's sort of a long answer to what you asked.